The Zambia Flying Doctor Service was the brainchild of Jim Lawless and his wife Meg, who were both English doctors who had come to northern Rhodesia, as Zambia was previously known, in 1961, and they worked there for about the next 10 years. Jim had this vision of a network of bush clinics with airstrips beside them, scattered across rural Zambia, and he planned, I think, 19 in all, although some of them didn't get built. And he started off with a single one to the west of Ndola at a place called Mushingashi. And that opened up in the first instance in about 1965, and it was serviced by him and his wife alone for the next almost 2 years until they got a government grant to expand. The major government grant came through in March 1967, and Jim went to London and set up recruiting doctors. I saw the advertisement in the BMJ and went across and was interviewed and happily accepted. The first of his recruits started work in May or so of 1967, and I and one other arrived in August. And I opened up my clinic at Mofu in the northeast. The hut we came to on that first visit didn't even have a roof, and we had to work standing up. In the middle of the day, we sat down under a tree, the nurse, the pilot, and I, and drew out the plans for a more substantial building on the only piece of paper we could find, which was the inside of a cigarette packet. That got constructed over the next few weeks, and we moved into it in the later part of September. And it was very well made. It used the same construction techniques that they used for their own houses and any buildings they made, which was a framework of saplings with mud plastered over the outside, and the roof was of straw thatch, which was quite efficacious. It kept the rain out unless it was too shallow a pitch angle, which ours was initially, but we changed that. The rains didn't come until late November that year. And the first bad storm, we had to remake the roof because the nurse's end got rather wet. The patients were pretty much the usual mixture in any general practice. A lot of upper respiratory coughs and sore throats, sore ears, sore eyes. If there was no focal infection at all, the children or anybody else were treated for malaria on an empirical basis because, of course, we had no diagnostic facilities. No blood tests, no x-rays. We had a thermometer, stethoscope, blood pressure cuff, otoscope, ophthalmoscope, and that was about it. The treatment had to be empirical, and if there was no obvious cause for a fever, the patient was given anti-malarial treatment with chloroquine, which at that time happily still worked. Any substantial chest infection was given a tetracycline. Tetracycline was really so effective in this population which had never seen antibiotics. In fact, you could say that even of penicillin, it was quite miraculous to see how penicillin could cure up even substantial wound infections quite quickly. And if after a week this had not worked, a presumptive diagnosis of tuberculosis was made and triple therapy started with streptomycin, PAS, and isoniazid. One got quite blasé about feeling spleens because they were so obvious, especially in these little kids. You could almost feel them with your thumb. Communication with the patients was a bit of a problem, obviously, because I didn't speak the local language and the interpreter I had spoke a rather basic English, but we managed to get along. I saw anywhere up to 55 patients in a 4 or 5 hour clinic period, and there wasn't a lot of time to gain much insight into their background. In the short time I was there, I didn't really manage to learn any of the local dialect, short of the words for good morning and hello, which was Mapalenim Kwai. Flying in Zambia had its scarier side on some occasions, although happily I wasn't involved in any of them. The airstrips often had holes in the ground, and occasionally someone would put a nose wheel into it and bend a propeller, which meant flying out a new one. The Central African Plateau is at a level of 4,000 feet generally, And in a hot country, the temperature can go up to 100 degrees quite easily, so the air is thin and takeoffs can require quite a bit of runway. Our airstrips were all about 3,000 feet long and didn't give me any problems in the time I was there, although I wasn't doing the flying, of course. Our pilots were professionals. We had one minor incident towards the end of my stay when the pilots, after landing, lost directional control and went off the edge of the runway into mud where the nose wheel collapsed. But the speed was very slow by that point and nobody was hurt, except the pilot's reputation. There had been one bad accident the year before I arrived when a demonstration aircraft, a Beagle B-206 flown by their professional pilots, crashed on takeoff out of West 1 with 4 people on board, 2 of whom were Jim and Meg Lawless. The aircraft went right over on its back but did not burn, and nobody was seriously hurt. The ZFDS was a very interesting piece of work because I had just finished my post-qualification year in the end of July '67, and I was not due to start my next job in Australia until January or February of 1968. And this fitted in very neatly in between the two, aside from actually being on the way. It was interesting to see the tropical diseases. We saw kwashiorkor, we saw the occasional snake bite, we saw malaria. We did not happily see sleeping sickness because my clinic wasn't in a tsetse fly area. But to me, the greatest joy of the whole thing was the flying, which I'd never had a chance to do before, and which prompted me to take out a pilot's license as soon as I arrived in Australia.